Joining us now for our weekly partnership segment, we have David Sirota of The Lever, who has many things to tell us about his Hollywood Oscars experience. Great to see you, David.
Good to see you, David.
Good to see you both.
Yeah.
So two things. First of all, congrats on The Lever, rebranding and expansion, which is very exciting. And also congrats on the Oscar nomination, even though you did not win the award. That's unbelievable that you were nominated for an Oscar and got to go. So let's actually put your latest piece on this up on the screen, because you wrote a little bit about what it was like. You say, the Oscar speech that stayed in my pocket. It was an honor to be nominated for a climate film. We must continue to demand action. So just give us a little bit of your thoughts and reflections on this whole experience, David.
Well, it really was a great honor to be nominated, and I should say it was a really great honor to win the Writers Guild's Award for Best Original Screenplay with Adam McKay. So that was from fellow writers, so that was fantastic. And look, getting nominated is just, it's not a life plot twist I ever expected. So I had a blast in the experience of it, just going to see what that entire spectacle is like. I will admit, I was not in the room when Will Smith and Chris Rock got into it. I had actually stepped out to grab a drink and commiserate with some folks after we didn't win the Oscar. So we were out in the hall sort of lamenting that. But it was all great. I will say I was a little bit maybe not mystified, but a little bit disappointed that the climate crisis did not make any kind of appearance or mention at this huge event where there's millions and millions of people tuning in. I would have liked to have seen that platform be used to mention some of the things that are happening in our world that are of great urgent import, and that wasn't there. But as I put on at The Lever, I put out the speech that I was going to give, and it was basically going to say something very simple, which is that the success of Don't Look Up, the millions and millions of people who tuned in, I mean, it was the #2 most watched movie on the world's largest streaming platform. My hope is that the folks in that room would take a lesson from that to say that there is a huge pent-up demand among millions and millions of people for television shows, movies, journalism, all sorts of content that honestly struggles with the climate crisis that is bearing down on our world. And I would have asked everybody in that room to use their enormous power to continue to make content about that crisis that wrestles with the uncomfortable and scary issues surrounding that crisis.
So, David, in terms of the reaction to the Oscars, it kind of validated your entire movie, didn't it? In terms of like how people are just talking about Will Smith and all of that while the world burns. How did you make of it in that context?
I'll admit at times it felt like I was inside the movie. Like it felt kind of Alice in Wonderland. Like we had made a movie about a comet headed towards Earth and everybody being distracted with celebrity culture, with all sorts of frivolous nonsense. And then I was essentially at the Oscars, a place that could have been in part a platform for a discussion or at least mention of some of the huge crises happening in our world. And instead, the takeaway from the event was a fight between two celebrities. Now, obviously, that situation was incredibly shocking for what it was. But I do think there's that meta message there, which is that there really is this unbelievably powerful culture of distraction, especially when it comes to celebrity culture, that makes it so difficult for us to struggle with, deal with, negotiate, and debate the most imminent and pressing issues of the day. And so I think it's a disturbing commentary on that. And frankly, I don't have a kind of skeleton key answer for how we fix this. I mean, I just came off of doing a movie that millions and millions and millions of people saw, and it culminated with an award show that didn't make any reference of that at all. Now, I don't mean that as like, hey, I'm annoyed or sad or sour grapes of not winning. I was just honored to be nominated. I'm making the larger point of the question of, will the culture industry and obviously the corporate media industry and the political world, are we willing to actually struggle with this crisis in a real way? Or are we really just going to plow forward and distract ourselves as things get worse?
Well, I think there's so much to dig into with this. Honestly, it's quite a profound conversation because what you did prove with Don't Look Up is that there is an appetite to struggle with the big challenges facing the world in a way that is thoughtful and that it doesn't have to be vegetables. It can be a movie with a lot of stars that's actually really fun to watch and really, entertaining. But doing another Will Smith take is easy and it's cheap.
Right.
And it also gets clicks and views and eyeballs. So oftentimes, cable news producers or people in that industry, what they'll say is basically like, well, you guys are getting the content that you want. Because we know if we do, the latest development and, now Chris Rock says he's still processing or whatever the latest take is, we know you're going to look at it. But what you've demonstrated is, while that may be true, there is this desire for this more thoughtful, more profound, more relevant, more important content as well. You just have to have the willingness to actually do the work to make that, into something that people really want to consume.
That's such a good point. I mean, you're right. I mean, one of my takeaways was, how do we make the climate crisis and the end of the livable ecosystem that supports all human life as compelling and interesting as two celebrities fighting on a stage, right? I mean, it's kind of unbelievable that we have to ask that question, but it also is a profoundly, I think, troubling commentary, perhaps, on the creativity of the news industry. By that I mean, if we can't make the imminent demise of the livable ecosystem as compelling as two celebrities fighting on a stage, then it's really a commentary on us. It's not really a commentary on the audience. It's a commentary on the news industry that says it's not willing to muster the creativity and innovation to make that unbelievably compelling story about the potential end of the human species, to not make that story more compelling. And so I think moving forward, the onus is on all of us to muster that creativity in a systemic way every single day.
That's an interesting perspective.
Here's the other thing I wanted to ask you about, David. Obviously, you and I have very similar politics. You work for Bernie. We're both, broadly on the left. Do you think that the right and the sort of like status quo and the neoliberals and the military-industrial complex do a much better job of getting their stories told through sort of pop culture than the left does? Because I think that's part of why this movie struck such a nerve, is because it represented a view of the world that just isn't seen that much in Hollywood.
I don't think that's necessarily true. I mean, I think that there are stories baked into a lot of cultural products that especially now. I mean, we go back to the 80s, it's different. But I think now you do see a number of cultural products, even animated movies for kids that tell the story of unfairness and inequality and the like. And I don't know if that's a quote unquote left story or a quote unquote right story, but I do think some of these stories are being told. I think the problem is that they are not they're not necessarily calling for action. They're not necessarily indicting the political and economic system. So I think one thing that set our movie apart in some ways is that our movie was telling a story about the here and now, the system right now. I think a lot of cultural products, the problem is not necessarily a left or right issue. It's that a lot of cultural products are looking back in history as sort of the safe escape of history, or the safe escape of faraway fantastical storylines. And a lot of the content is not in the here and now, wrestling with issues that are uncomfortable. And I think part of the reason is that the culture industry is in some ways risk averse. If you make a set of content in the here and now, the issue is going to be, the reason it's risky is that everybody has an opinion, a strong opinion about the here and now. And so it's going to inherently be divisive.
the reason I'm thinking of it this way is because you have like a million, cops reality TV shows,
Sure.
Law and Order and all these sorts of things. You have the Pentagon has made it a priority to put out
Sure.
there, all of these sort of like military and like, pro-war basically, or sort of glorifying war type of feature films. And you also have a million stories of like the bootstrapping capitalists making it up through the system and the typical like American dream story. And you have very little out there for pop culture consumption that is anti-war, that is pro-labor union. I mean, the amount of like union content in pop culture is basically nothing at this point. So that's why I framed it that way as, and I think
let me agree. Let me just agree with you on that since the 1980s, there are a lot of tropes deep baked into content that tell a very conservative story about the country. I mean, I always think about Ghostbusters as an example. It's a story about the essentially private military contractors having to save the day from an inept government and from an EPA that's overbearing. And you can track that through up until now. I have seen something of a slight change in some recent years with telling some stories about corporate elites, corporate villains that are a problem in society. And that's been encouraging. I think it's been belated. But I certainly agree with you on a deep programming level. There is a very conservative story that continues to be told over and over again. And that is, I agree with you, a fundamental problem.
Yeah, and there's oftentimes, the focusing on diversity and identity, like that's very comfortable for Hollywood at this point. But again, on unions, labor, corruption, those sorts of things. I would love to see more. I hope you're working on more projects. Also, shout out to the Lorax for also telling a great sort of anti-capitalist story as well. But David, it's always great to see you. Thanks for taking some time to share your thoughts, and congrats again.
Thanks, David.
Thanks to both of you.
Good to see you, man.
And thank you guys for watching. We're going to have more for you later. Cable news is ripping us apart, dividing the country, making it impossible to function as a society, and making it impossible to know just what is true and what is false. But the good news is they are failing and they know it.
That is why we're building something new, a new mainstream, a healthier one, something more trustworthy, something that we are going to need in one of the most pivotal times in American history. We are building up here for the midterms, for the upcoming presidential election, but we need your help. So if you can help us out by becoming a premium member today at breakingpoints.com, we're trying to change America for the better and the entire world.
So what are you waiting for, guys? Go to breakingpoints.com and sign up and help us build a new mainstream.